welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on the show, we have Carl Hart, an amazing individual, wrote the book Drug Use for Grown-Ups. Psychedelics Today did a giveaway on our dime of the book and gave away 5 copies. And I just really, really, really believe in this book, and I think you should read it. It's essential, in my opinion, for those of us in this movement, because there's a lot of judgment about people who use other drugs. And perhaps we should not have those. Perhaps this is all artifice and horrible stuff left over from prohibition, the drug war, and much more. So yeah, the origins of the drug war are horrifying, and we need to understand them. But even better, let's understand drug use for adults. So for grown-ups, sorry. And yeah, I read this book nearly 2 times and plan to, read it a few more times. Probably going to do a few more giveaways on our dime as well, just because we believe in the book so much. So stay tuned for that kind of stuff. Really, really grateful that Carl Hart came out for this and spent so much time with us. We recorded for nearly 2 hours. So strap in. This is going to be quite the podcast. We go all over the map and really dig in on a lot of important topics. And yeah, so again, Carl Hart, thank you. You're such a inspiration, and yeah, just so influenced by your work, and just very grateful. So people can come out of the closet about your drug use. That's like the main ask. Come out of the closet. I did it recently with my my old work colleagues. I actually just merged my LinkedIn accounts. So it's just kind of a goofy thing to do, but I essentially came out to about 1,200 people who only know me from working in software, and it's pretty easy. A little scary, but technically quite easy, and no blowback yet. People are actually coming to me and asking interesting questions. So what happens if you start sharing stories? And especially if you're privileged enough to not be in trouble with the police or anything like that. Yeah. Anyway, this is an amazing podcast. I hope you enjoy it as well. Please tell your friends to listen to this, send it all over, and let us know what you think. Hit us up at psychedelicstayemail@gmail.com. Hit us up on socials or wherever. Join us on our Facebook group, wherever you want to hit us up. And yeah, just a reminder, you can join us for our Navigating Psychedelics course that starts May 20. It's for clinicians and therapists. It's an amazing time, 8-week live supported process. And it's one of my favorite things that I get to do over here at Psychedelics Today. So you want to learn more, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. I think that's it for now. Hope you all enjoy this one and see you on the other side. Bye-bye. Hello, everybody. This is Joe. This is Psychedelics Today. We are joined by Carl Hart, professor of psychology at Columbia. Is that right? Or you have a specialty in pharmacology, but you were the past chair of psychology at Columbia?
Yeah, I'm a professor in the departments of psychology and psychiatry, but that's it, man. That's cool.
Right on. And psychologist primarily, right?
Yeah, my PhD is in neuroscience, but I'm a psychologist too. But just whatever.
Cool. And you've done possibly more research on crack than maybe anybody alive, right? Like you've been able to do it in a lab environment and publish a ton.
Yeah, there are a few other people who probably published more, but we're all like on the same team. But yeah, I've done a lot.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think maybe the most notable thing you've done, like before all of your books came out, was this comparison to methamphetamine and Adderall. Largely the effects are the same given route of administration and dose.
That's right.
Yeah, I made sure to take some Adderall like a half an hour ago just for this interview.
Right on, man.
Yeah. So, all right, you've got some amazing books, Carl. You got, probably it seemed like 10,000 podcasts in the past few months, and TV appearances and whatnot. And your book High Price, I thought was amazing. Me and my girlfriend, I think, listened to it a bunch of times on the audio, and on our recent drive, like right as soon as your new book came out, I think I was able to listen to it about a time and a half, and it's just extraordinary. So, first off, thank you for everything you've done. It's incredibly
Yeah.
brave. It's I think easy for us to not know how brave it is of you to do all this. You've got a lot on the line. Being black man in America, professorship,
Yeah.
kind of high risk.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. The alternative is just unacceptable.
Right.
Cowering and not living your life as you think you should, and not living your life as you think you should out of fear. That's not a real life. And so
Mm.
I have children, and your children, they see the real you, and so you can't fake the funk, as they say, because if you do, they won't have any respect for you. And so I couldn't have that.
Mm. Right. So you got to go forward with integrity and, do what you think is right, which a lot of people just skip that for career or just convenience.
Well, I think that's an excuse when they say career. I mean, well, there are times when you have to be judicious and you have to be smart about these things. But I'm 54, have a career, I've established myself, I've proven myself. If you can't live like the man you think you are at that stage, then you're not the man that you think you are.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. And I really appreciated how you laid everything out in your books. It's like, you have to kind of understand the origins of the drug war a bit. You have to understand how impacted so many communities are in the country. And it's so fucked up. It's like entirely unacceptable. And, we're paying tax dollars so that these assholes can do this stuff to so many people around the drug war, enforcement, imprisonment, murder. Like Breonna Taylor, like you recently mentioned, was a victim of the drug war. Like it's so insane.
Yeah, the thing about it is that people. That's why it upsets me when people say that the drug war is a failure. The drug war is not a failure. In fact, it's doing exactly what we want it to do. It
Yep.
subjugates those people we don't care for. It functions as a jobs program for specific individuals in our community, in our society. It allows the media these salacious, exciting things to talk about. It allows politicians to pretend that they have a solution for the problem. They'll put more cops on the streets. The cops love them. So there are so many people benefiting from this drug war. That's why it continues, because it's such an important American institution.
Mm. Right. And you point out really skillfully that it's been exported overseas to like catastrophic effect with what's the guy's name? Duterte, essentially like murdering people for having used methamphetamine in the past.
Duterte, Bolsonaro in Brazil, all around the world, these horrible people are allowed to be horrible people as long as they say they're on the side of Americans with the drug war. Then we excuse all of this awful behavior.
Hmm. And it's really wild to me that it comes out of these folks at NIDA often. What was the lady's name? Nora.
Nor,
It's kind of like you have to be in lockstep.
yes.
Unbelievable that the data being published is being used in this way overseas.
Yeah, we have to understand too that scientists are benefiting from the war on drugs, including me. I benefited.
Mm.
I'm a tenured professor at Columbia in part because of the war on drugs. My PhD was paid for because of the war on drugs. And so a number of us benefited. I just didn't realize I was benefiting. And then I didn't realize who were the people who were suffering as a result of this. And so that helped me to take a step back and say, hold up, something's very wrong here. And I think many of the scientists know something's very wrong, but I think they look at the costs and the pluses for them. And I think they have weighed that calculus and made a decision in many cases. It's just easier. You keep your labs funded, you keep publishing, and then you can block out those people who are suffering because you tell yourself that you're doing God's work from keeping these so-called dangerous drugs away from people when you know better because you are giving these drugs to people in the lab, but you rationalize it to yourself and you are silent. And that's the thing that I found abhorrent, that more people didn't come
Mm,
out and say, this is wrong.
Yeah. I
right.
wonder, do you think you could go a little bit more into your process around that? Because I think that is common, right? Like people that are in these institutions or in these professional fields, they have that feeling, but like what stops a lot of people from actually speaking up against that or making some change? And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your process around that.
Well, I think, okay, like we started off by saying, I'm a black man in America. And so I know the kind of hell that I have faced as just simply being a black man. You learn how to deal with it and you negotiate the society accordingly. But I recognize when I'm in some spaces, I'm going to be treated differently. And rather than complaining about it, whatever, you just make adjustments. And that's just how it is. Now, in this case, it's a similar sort of thing. When I go home, I see the carnage of the drug war. My friends, my family, people that I care about, they've all been negatively impacted in some way. Other scientists who are not black and who don't have to face that don't necessarily have to deal with these sort of things. And so you can ignore it. But I couldn't ignore it. And then I also had to think about my sons and what would
Mm,
happen if my sons became victims of this drug war in some way,
hmm
whether it's prison, whether it's taking tainted drug, whether it's paranoia caused by the police and they're just experimenting, whatever it was. And so I had to think about that. Then I thought about I'm in a position where I have published hundreds of papers in the scientific literature on this stuff, and I'm an expert. And if I don't stand up and say something, knowing that my children are at risk and people who look like me are at risk, knowing that poor people who don't really have a voice in the society are at risk, and I didn't say anything. I feared what my sons would think of me because it's going to be exposed, particularly with this younger generation.
Yeah.
They are exposing a lot of things. And so it's going to be exposed. And so that made it easier for me to say, like, well, I want to be on the right side of history. Now, I knew my current colleagues and people in the field would come out swinging, and that's what they're doing. They're kind of getting their ducks in line, but the goal would be to well, let's discredit me.
mm,
But when you go to the literature and you look at my papers, they speak for themselves. So people can say whatever they want, but the fact remains, I'm an expert, and all the things that I am saying are tied to the evidence. And so, if we're going to talk about have any of these discussions, that's cool. But let's just make sure that evidence rules, and our positions will be shaped and dictated accordingly, according to the evidence. And so, it's not the sort of most comfortable place to be in the world, but I don't have an alternative
Right.
because any other position would just be unacceptable.
mm. Yeah. It's yeah, it's about time more people step up, really. Like if you look at, how many people are still making money on cannabis even though there's still political prisoners in the United States, just alone, like that's unconscionable to me. The amount of money being made. And, we've really got to clean up our shit here. There's so much left to do. And we have a moral imperative because people are literally dying or going to jail for the rest of their lives, or families are being broken up. And it's no joke. This is like on our watch. And it's largely because we're not standing up and saying anything. And we really need to.
That's exactly how I feel, just like you, man. And I really, when I was a kid, I kind of believed all that sort of the American patriotic, jingoistic nonsense that they taught you as children, I believed it. I believed this whole thing about liberty and justice for all, and that we were the freest country in the world. All of those sort of proclamations, I believe. And turns out a number of our fellow citizens didn't. They just said it. And so here I am trying to live up to the ideals of the Declaration of Independence and these sort of things, meaning that I have to fight on behalf of other Americans who are being shut out. Other people don't actually believe that.
Mm. So you've spent you've observed the psychedelic world for a bit now. You're friendly with Rick Doblin and others, and I'm kind of curious, like, what your observation is about what many of these psychedelic organizations can do to help play a part in this kind of battle for what's right around drug policy, aka eliminating it. But where do you see we can improve?
One of the most disappointing things has been kind of watching the inactions of the drug policy organizations in the face of this media storm that I just experienced. And then when you think about, and I think about the sort of call to action that I had in the book, I asked people to come out of the closet, middle class, respectable people who are doing well. And so I expected drug policy organizations to just come out with big statements like, we don't care if our employees test positive on a drug test. We're not doing that sort of stuff because it's not the relevant behavior. We just want them to perform their job. And so we're saying this in a public way. We don't care. Or we're out of the closet as a drug policy organization. We believe that people should be allowed to alter their consciousness. They should be allowed to choose to put whatever they like in their bodies without having the state interfere. It has been mute, silent. And that's been one of the most disappointing things, watching this in action. And it's blowing my mind, really.
Right. So coming out of the closet being probably one of the most important things we can do. Yeah. Like, I'm pretty out running a podcast like Psychedelics Today. There's not too many other ways to be out. But you're right. Like, leadership at a lot of these groups isn't really coming out. And, Rick does well. He has like his bong in the back of his, YouTube videos he does and stuff, which I love. Yeah. But it's, is it enough, I guess?
Yeah, Rick is
going in the right direction, I guess.
Yeah, Rick and I have had conversations, and I think Rick is planning something big. But it's just an interesting thing how so few people have taken advantage of this moment. This is their moment.
Right. Yeah. With the amount of media covering psychedelic spaces, this is really a massive opportunity. I plan to blow a lot of corporate executives' minds over the next few months as I talk to them. And, try to rattle their cage. I got in an argument with JR from MindMed recently on the podcast. And it's like, how can you really split like drug policy change, like substantial drug policy change, to like incremental medical improvements? Like, I think drug policy change is the moral imperative here. Like, it's great that we might get some new drugs to prescribe, but if we're still like doing all this harm, what's the use?
Right on. It's like people are comfortable with shifting the gatekeeping activities to the other cops who are physicians. They are just cops without a uniform or a different uniform, and so it's mind-boggling to me. It's like, imagine having to go to your physician and say, "Yo, can I get a prescription for alcohol?" Come on.
Right. No way. I confessed using edibles to my physician recently. I'm never going back to that guy again. He was such a dickhead. And Like, I am really frustrated with the way most physicians, speak to me about drugs, especially when I'm the client slash patient. I don't know. I feel like a customer in this country because it's so profit driven, but it'd be
Yes.
nice if I could
Yeah.
feel like a patient again. Yeah, it's a wild deal. Have you had any conversations about like what a post prohibition future looks like? Like, do we have to do things like take a hunting class before we can, go hunting kind of deal? Or how do you see it? Like other than just immediately cutting out the scheduling system, which I think is a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the nuts and the bolts and the weeds, but certainly that should be on the table. This sort of requirement for some drugs. Maybe that's what this sort of committee of smart people decide, or it might be some sort of graduated process. That's fine, but I haven't participated in those kind of discussions in part because like with the cannabis thing, cannabis legalization, the different states are doing these different experiments, and then we will learn from these differing states. And so that's an advantage of having these different states. But the thing that
Totally.
one of the things that has happened with this conversation when we start talking about the nuts and bolts, then you start including disingenuous people, and then their job is really to tell you why it can't happen. And so that's why I kind of stay away from those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of know my lane, and my lane is to push for that. This is an American right, so let's make it happen. It's not that complicated. We put a man on the moon. We've done a lot more complicated things. We just developed these vaccines in this short period of time. Are you kidding me? We
Right.
can't figure this out.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, exactly. This is a weird political problem. It's quite solvable. A couple politicians are going to have to lose their jobs and join the team over here to make this thing happen, which is a moral imperative. I'm dealing with a lot of clergy right now, getting them kind of up to speed on, psychedelics and drug policy. And, we had this really interesting discussion around should we be spending $2 million per religious group to get, permission to practice our religion from the federal government? Or should we collectivize and spend all that money to modify drug policy, which, religious groups had a pivotal role, like a major role in the civil rights movement, which that shit's not over yet. And this is it. This is a big part of it. And, I didn't try to tell them what to think. I just tried to make the argument really strong to go, all right, are we being self-indulgent here? And to what degree? Especially when other people are, all these harms. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, please don't overstate the role of the church in the civil rights movement. They played a role simply in part because, like, people like Martin Luther King came out of the church, but what he was doing was not where the church was at in general. He was pushing them, and so the sort of church I think they get this sort of pass, or they get this revisionist history to be seen as progressive. They never were progressive. They're not progressive now. And so, yeah, please don't expect too much from that group.
All right. All right. We'll see. But yeah, I'll try not to hope too much. So I actually reached out to our Facebook group, all our listeners, letting them know that I was recording with you today. And we had a few questions I want to throw out to you from them. And this is one of the first ones. What was it like knowing you're going to be writing and publishing such a powerful book that might cause you trouble? Did you just, based on what we already talked about, you just felt like you had no other alternative?
Yeah, so I didn't think the book would cause me a lot of trouble. I don't think that way. I think I live in a logical world, my head, and I'm always thinking that all I have to do is make this argument logically, and then people will fall in line. That's naive as fuck, as I'm discovering. But that's the world. That's the world in which I live, and I love that world because I can't live in an illogical world. It's just too much for me. And so this sort of response, the illogical, the sensationalistic, the response that just attacked me for irrelevant reasons and they haven't looked at the arguments. I really wasn't expecting that, but it's okay because I'm somebody who would say, bring it on. That's the, I would prefer not to have it, but if it comes, such is life. And then
Mm-hmm.
in terms of writing a powerful book, I always just try to write the best thing that I can produce.
Mm-hmm.
This book was a long time coming, and then while writing it, I like to describe this process as being in the dark alone, and it's frightening because you're in your head alone, hours and hours on it, each day, every day, and then you can go nuts doing this sort of thing, and that's kind of like what happened. Particularly the cocaine chapter, where I wrote that one in Brazil, so I could be surrounded by the carnage, and I also kind of wore a disguise, and so nobody really knew who I was. And so I was just another nigga in Brazil. And being just another nigga in Brazil is far worse than being just another nigga in the United States because your ass might not survive the walk to the store. And so it was. That's kind of how this book was. I was trying to write a book about joy, the joys of drug use, responsible drug use, the joys of this. And then it turned into this piece that was becoming dark in a lot of places, in part because I was in the dark. I was in my head and I was there alone and it was frightening. And so, but I couldn't be anything but honest and transparent for the reader. Otherwise, why would you read it?
Right.
And so I didn't want to let down the reader, and so I had to just keep going. And I hope like I try to make sure when I write that I really bring it, because people expect you to bring it, and I don't want to let people
Mm-hmm.
down.
Right. Both of your books are not letdowns. So thank you for that. And Brazil sounds like a terrifying place. Can you kind of bring us a little bit up to speed about how horrifying it was down there or scary it was for you?
Yeah, in Brazil, they kill hundreds. The police kills hundreds of black people there every year, and it's not even news, and it's assassination, and the politicians brag about this, and there's this sort of NGO industry where you have these NGOs working in the favelas. The favelas are like the hood, where the government does not provide any services in the favelas. And so as a result, church organizations, various organizations who are in the underworld or the alternative economy, they provide services and people fight for territory just like you might expect, but they're all trying to take care of the community. And then there are militias who are police or ex-police who are also gangs. And Brazil has the largest African population outside of Nigeria. And so you have all of these black people in Brazil, and then you have a lot of sort of wealthy white people in Brazil who, along with the NGOs, the good ones, are conspicuously sympathetic, but they don't really do much to solve people's problems. But it's like this virtue signaling. Hey, I'm on the good side, but you really don't do anything. And they do things like make sure that the kids in the favelas or the young people have art. Bullshit. Like they can rap, they can do this. Not the basics. Like if you really want to change it, you make sure they have an education. I think like the average level of education in Brazil is not even the sixth grade.
Wow.
And so it's like, it's so fundamental about what needs to be done. But instead, they do things like art. like rap. And I mean, no disrespect to that, because it's like, that's cool. But when you have people who are not educated, I think you have some other sort of priorities that you should be attending to first. And so, when I go there, people treat me really well. I'm an American professor with a little name. And so the white folks treat me really well, and they take me to these places. And so I can go talk in the favelas to the brothers and sisters. And then it took me a long time to figure out the game. It's like, I'm there just basically to say, see, here's one who succeeded.
Mm.
And so it was a horrifying realization when I peeped the game and realized what was happening. So on the one hand, I really enjoy being there with the brothers and sisters and trying to help explain what needs to be done. On the one hand, that's a great thing. But then on the other hand, it depresses the hell out of me, because it's apartheid that's going on down there. And there is genocide going on down there. And in Americans, we don't even know. And we think of Brazil as just like these beautiful beaches and beautiful people. And it is hell for some people down there.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. The favela topic has been so forefront in my mind for a long time. Just, watching these videos that glorify the police down there. Look at the great work we're doing. And it's like, what on earth is happening? The level of violence, the level of militarization is unbelievable. And there's just no money spent, seems like to me, to help them.
Yeah,
or at least not enough.
They just need basic education. There are a lot of NGOs down there, a lot of big funders down there, but all they are really doing, in my view, or mainly what they're doing, is like providing safari for visitors and Europeans and Americans. So they're providing, so you can come take a tour through the favelas, and it reminded me of being on safari. It was
insane.
Yeah, it was obscene.
Right. So you heard it here first. America's not the only place with a lot of problems, but this is it's a long history, right? This is coming out of probably like colonialism, pushing it even further with like, slavery, and then the UN kind of pushing down, US UN pushing down weird drug policy. And just so much, such a complicated ball of wax. And yeah, I think I'm with you on the education part.
Yeah, we also have to remember that Brazil was not a democracy until, I believe, 1989. Before that, they were a dictatorship, and they were a dictatorship bolstered by the United States.
Mm-hmm.
There were times when there were uprisings, and our presidents, like I remember during the Kennedy era, I believe he sent the Navy there offshore to make sure we were there to back their dictatorship in case the uprising got out of hand. So we were supportive of that dictatorship, and we helped maintain that the subjugation of their people.
Right. And this is not just US Brazil, right? This is like a chronic pattern that we've exported many places. And it's scary that we've had this much influence in such negative ways worldwide. And we need to know that. We really need to know this history. Otherwise, we can get really caught up in some crazy stuff.
Well, otherwise, what's going to happen is that it's going to come back and bite us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's the thing that we as Americans need to know. We need to know a little something about world history and our role in it, and not this fake glorified role. I mean, our real role in this, and we need to reckon with it and try to make amends for it, and try and be better world citizens.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's jump back to your book here. Kind of curious about, what's been the worst part so far? Like, have you Do you feel like you've been harmed at all by publishing the book or your media kind of tour?
Yeah, I'm tired, and
Yeah.
it's worn me out, and that's not cool. And my writing has suffered because I don't have the time to write, and that's suffered. But again, like I said, man, I didn't have a choice, so I don't really think about whether or not publishing this harmed me or how. I can't do that. It's just it's how it is, and I'll just deal and just try and
Right.
deal as gracefully as I can, and with the integrity that I think I have. That's all I can do.
Hmm.
What are some things that you've learned throughout this process?
Wow, that's a great thing. I learned so many things from this. I've learned, this might sound a bit naive. I've learned that people don't give a shit about the evidence or what you say. They will just lie and distort your position, and they smile in your face, reporters, and then they'll just tell a story as they see it. So I am a little more wary of people. I don't like that. I really don't like
Mm,
that because that's a horrible, horrible place to live your life. It's nice to be
Mm.
welcoming and open, and so that's a lovely thing. And it's hard to say what I've learned. It might be better to say what was reinforced,
Mm.
about what I already knew. The snakes who come out against you, the jealousy, rather than being like, this is great. How can I help? How can we make our world better? And people are petty. Not not the general public, but the folks who are the opinion makers. A lot of our journalists, especially. Oh my God, and they are also and I said this in the book. They're from the dominant class largely, and
Hmm.
their first goal is to protect their way of life in that dominant class. And so even the progressives, they really don't want to shake up anything because they're benefiting. Like I had to look at myself and think about what, if anything, I might lose if we make sure other people are being taken care of. I gain a lot more if other people are being taken care of because I can walk down the street knowing that those people are good, knowing that we can all interact. That's far more valuable than any of these other things. But many of our people who are opinion makers, that's the real problem in this society.
mm,
They're all from the same class. And, you have Democrats, Republicans, and they're the same people. They're just
Hmm.
arguing on the edges. But they're all invested in keeping this shit exactly the same.
yeah.
We can do our drugs, but not those lower class people because we don't want them getting out of control and they can't handle it and we must protect them. That's what the Democrats say. We must protect them. Whereas the Republicans might say, fuck them. But the bottom line is that they all have little regard for those folks who are not a part of their class. And so that was one of those things that, I kind of knew, but it really was brought home with this book.
Yeah.
Mm.
What do you think would like help to create that change? Like what would create a shift there? Because to me, like when I'm listening, you say that it's just thinking about how systemic it is. And it was just helping out with a webinar today, and we were talking about like family constellation. And it was really interesting. The one example that the presenter was bringing up was talking about bringing, the recreational drug user together, and then like the government together, and the police, and seeing all these different relationships play out, and seeing the roles in all those relationships. And it's like, yeah, once you start to change that relationship within the system, it's like the system just gets all wacky and they want to go back to
Joe?
some sense of normalcy. And I wonder, yeah, how can we move forward? How can we create some of this change here?
So you went out part way, Cal, but I think you were
Oh
asking,
no.
how do we change that?
Right. Yeah. How do we move from where we're at now, given this entrenchment
Yeah.
with this weird establishment, Saint Joe Biden, who put a lot of people in jail, right, for this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Like one of the things that I tried, I don't know if I did as well, but I tried to get people to see that the action isn't with like the politicians, like Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
The politicians don't lead, they follow. And our
Mm-hmm.
job is to persuade the public and get the public to be educated to understand what's happening. That's our job. Now, the real trick, though, is the opinion makers, the journalists, the late night TV host. All of those people are invested in keeping this shit the same. And so that's where people have got to be able to see. Like those people are not progressive. They are not here for change. They have their positions. They've done well within this system. And their job is to protect every bit of the system. And so it's like it's not that we need to like destroy the system. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to look at every aspect of the system and and not in these incremental ways. Like it is chic for people to say things like, hey, I support drug decriminalization, I'm forward thinking, and not even really knowing what the fuck that means. Like drug decriminalization.
Right.
Drug decriminalization does not do anything to impact the police force. For example, they can still mess with you like they have done in places like Baltimore, where they decriminalized marijuana in 2014. But you still got 96% of the people who they're arresting are black, and those numbers really
Yeah.
hadn't changed. In New York, we decriminalized weed in 1977, but yet you have all of these arrests for small amounts of weed. So decriminalization does nothing for a police force that is determined to be racist or whatever. And then it does nothing for keeping people safe from adulterants or tainted drugs. It does nothing for that. And it's not consistent with the principles of the founding document: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so when you start to like really question what we're doing and really questioning our values, and then you ask people, the journalists, the late night TV hosts, all of these people who are opinion makers, what do you think in that context? And then you see where they're at. And then you will be disappointed in most cases. And then it's our job to call them out.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like there was like these maniacs in Tennessee saying that, and I think other states as well, saying children are going to die from cannabis if we legalize or decriminalize. Like we got to call that shit out hard. It's insane.
Yeah. The governor of Nebraska said that the other day. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Jeez.
oh yeah. Like we just can't. When we see misinformation and lies, we really got to get up there and get loud.
We absolutely do, because that translates into somebody being subjugated, taken advantage of, and we have to realize that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I'm kind of curious. Like, did you catch the recent Joe Rogan with Hamilton, where Hamilton had a couple mentions of your work?
I saw the clip. I saw one of the clips. Somebody sent me a clip. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't think he understood what he was saying, but I'm gonna read you a paraphrase because I listened to it this morning. It was something. I'll read it. Hamilton Morris had a comment on a recent Jerry episode about something he expects that you would disagree with him on. Generally, I think his point was that dependence on a substance is to be avoided. He tried to differentiate this from addiction. Do you have any kind of like comments on this? Like he thinks that maybe you don't think dependence is an issue, and that's kind of how I read it, but I think he didn't phrase it properly.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that part. So no, I don't know
I'll
exactly
send you
what
the
he said.
timestamp later
Okay.
on. But
Okay.
like, like how do you differentiate addiction versus dependence on substance?
So I don't really do that differentiation.
Hmm.
I try to lay out what I'm talking about whenever I talk about addiction. And when I'm talking about addiction, I'm just using the most widely used definition, the DSM-5 definition, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the
Hmm.
American Psychiatric Association. That's all I'm using. And that definition just basically says that the person is having these disruptions in their functioning as a result of the drug, and they are disturbed by that disruptions. And so that's all I'm using. I'm using that definition. Now, when we're talking about physical dependence, that we certainly, I know what that is. It's the when people take a substance for some extended period of time, and then if they abruptly discontinue, they're going to have some negative symptoms, like if you've been
Hmm.
taking caffeine for months and months and months, you now don't have your caffeine, you might have a horrible headache. Or if you stop taking an opioid after months and months of use, you will experience some unpleasant side effects or withdrawal symptoms. If you do that with alcohol, you might actually, die. So
Hmm.
that's the kind of dependence, the physical dependence that I think of.
Cool. Yeah. And a lot of people go, oh, psychedelics are so innocent. And it's like, the drug of angels or something. I've seen some really dark shit.
Yeah.
People on psychedelics, overuse. Like I've certainly had periods of extreme overuse. I'm kind of happy for quarantine because it got me to slow down a little bit. But
Uh,
like this shit can get out of control with psychedelics. Like Charles Manson is like in large part from, created from this whole psychedelic world.
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because the fact is that these are chemicals and they alter your the ones that we are taking for the psychological effects. They alter your brain functioning, and it can be a really good thing, a positive thing, and you can also take too much of take a high dose. You might be inexperienced. You might be in an anxiety producing place, and that's not a good thing. So yeah, people have to have, well, that's why the title of the book is called Drug Use for Grown-Ups. I mean, you have to be responsible, just like if you get behind the wheel of a car. You have to be responsible. And so that's one of the things, too. Some people were upset because I somehow, in their view, felt like I threw people who were not responsible under the bus. It's like, that's some crazy shit. You know, I mean, that's just like, it's ludicrous to me. It's not that, I mean, there are times in my life when I'm irresponsible and I like to be better, but I am not telling me if I'm being irresponsible for whatever reason. I'm not going to tell me to engage in some more potentially dangerous activity. That would be even more irresponsible. So it's like, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. I wish adults can behave as they see fit, long as they don't bother other people. That's it. But I certainly don't want to encourage irresponsible behavior.
Right.
Yeah, I think one takeaway that I got from that was just being more intentional, right? Like, how do we approach drug use with more intention? So yeah, maybe we're not making, those like irresponsible decisions.
Like many people who have problems with these substances, or the ones who have been identified as having problem, stigma from the society cause so many of their problems. And I was trying to highlight that in the book and try to take some pressure off of those people who were catching hell based on the
Hmm.
stigma. That's why one of the reasons I asked people to get out of the closet. And so those people who said I threw irresponsible people under the bus, I think that's some psychological damage that people probably need to get checked out. But I don't know. But it's like that's certainly not what my intention was, and I certainly don't think I did that. And yeah,
Mm, right. Like this whole idea of stigma being like a strange feedback loop. Like this is really clear in Johann Hari's pretty popular book. I heard it might be a slightly problematic book, but it was a really helpful book showing how stigma can really just keep people in this horrible cycle. And I thought you did a great job talking about it on Joe Rogan. The first thing you do, let's help you feel good about yourself again. Like let's get you working and helping your family.
exactly,
Hugely important.
exactly, exactly. I mean, we all need to feel like we are somebody in our community, in our family, wherever. People need to be validated and feel like they are somebody, and that's one of the major things. Like when these people say that they're worried about drug addiction, or what I'm saying might increase drug addiction. That's some bullshit distraction. If you're really worried about the negative effects of drug addiction, you would make sure everybody in your society is working. You would make sure they all have health care. You'd make sure that basic needs were handled. Because if you did those things, you don't have to worry about drug addiction. You don't have to worry about these things.
Mm, right. And we can draw a decent this is politically dangerous for me given our audience, but we can pull from like the gun literature, like data on gun violence. Like there's more gun violence probably in Chicago than in other places with more guns because of the socioeconomic situation there. Like it's a
Yeah,
socioeconomic situation, not necessarily like a problem with other things.
Yeah, I don't know the data, but you might be right there. But I think that guns are a really good example. I mean, I grew up in a culture where everybody had guns, and you didn't have a tremendous amount of people being shot. I went to school at the University of Wyoming, which was a gun culture. You didn't have a lot of people being shot, and so clearly we know that our society, how healthy, psychologically healthy the society is, certainly plays a role in not only gun violence, but it also plays a role in other sort of issues in a society. And this is one of the reasons that the drug issue is so important for this society, because if we can blame drugs, then we don't have to look at the health of our society. Because all we have to say as a politician, as someone who wants to keep the status quo, all we have to say is we need to put more cops on the streets to get rid of drugs. That's all we need to say. And with that simple statement, you have satisfied enough of the segment who will vote and come out for you. The cops union will be out there for you. Parents will be out there for you, because then a lot of parents don't have to do their job either, in terms of teaching their children about drugs, or making sure they're reinforcing values that are meaningful. Like, are your kids good people? Those kind of values. Instead, they can. I don't know if you guys seen these sort of back in the '80s. The hip hop artists, and what they had them do were say things like, "Kids, stay off drugs." Now you can be a horrible person.
Yeah.
You can be horrible in every other way, but as long as you say stay off drugs, you're good. What kind of shit is that? That's what politicians do. That's what so many members of our society do. They say stay off drugs. All right, you're good. That's a pass.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
It's
You
wild.
reminded me of something that happened here in my town. So my girlfriend was she was hired to be the GM for one of the first pot stores doing recreational pot sales in Colorado. And, it became like an incredibly political situation because the store is on Main Street. And, eventually as a result of that, they kind of had her join the Rotary Club so she could hang out with all these society types, I guess. And one of the leaders who is running, I think, for mayor, said that she wants the store off of Main Street because, and this is publicly, because she didn't want to have to talk to her daughter about cannabis.
Mm.
Straight up.
Yep.
blew my mind that someone
Yep.
would be so honest about something so crazy.
Yep. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's like, and so people are saying, like, who's benefiting from this war on drugs and from our approach with drugs? Parents, you throw them in there too. But their children are losing, of course, but they're benefiting because they are responsible parents, when in fact, they're not.
Mm-hmm. It's incredible.
Even just makes me think about like stigma against treatment. I don't know why this just popped in my head, but in New Jersey, we've had a lot of people in my town die from overdoses, and that kind of just, that tainted market. But I remember there was a forum on one of these websites. They wanted to put a treatment facility kind of by this place that's, a gated community. I was just reading the comments, and people are like, not in my backyard. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, how much stigma there is about the treatment, and that if you put any sort of treatment around there, that's necessarily a bad thing. And it was just kind of ironic that it was around a gated community. But just even being real and be like, you realize all that's happening within your gated community, and a treatment facility would probably be really beneficial for the community because we don't really have too much around here.
Yep. Not in my backyard.
Yeah, exactly. Not in my backyard.
Unbelievable. Can you comment a little bit on treatment, Carl? Like, I know you did a pretty good rundown on Rogan about how problematic and predatory the treatment industry is.
Yeah, when I think of treatment, it's a mixed bag because it's such a wide range of available treatments out there. The thing that I just say is that if the treatment provider is focused on the so-called drug of the person who's having problem, if they're focused on the drug, they've already lost, because drug addiction has less to do with the drug and more to do with the sort of psychosocial environment in which the person is operating. That takes a long time to assess the individual to really find out what's going on. And then if you find out that this person was once gainfully employed, he was the breadwinner and well respected in his community, or she was the major income provider in her household and a pillar of that community. If those individuals lost their jobs and now they're having problems with substances, and you as a treatment provider are not figuring out how you can get those people comparable incomes and enhancing their self-worth, you're not going to deal with this issue. And I think in so many cases, treatment providers don't have those type of resources to do such a thing. And so we oftentimes kid ourselves. Now that's not to say that treatment doesn't work for some people, and they provided precisely what the person's needed, because sometimes what people need, for example, is just they need social connections, and they may find that in some treatment facilities, some treatment places. They need so there can be times when they find what they need, but personally, I would have a hard time figuring out where to send a loved one for a drug problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess on the psychedelic topic, what's your take on like psychedelic treatments for people that are struggling with any substance use, say as like Ibogaine, or any opioid, or some of the stuff that's coming out now with like the UK with MDMA for alcohol use and stuff like that?
PTSD with MDMA, and I really I'm not surprised MDMA for alcohol treatment. It's like that's a no-brainer. It's like you give somebody MDMA and under comfortable conditions, and who wouldn't be better? I mean, that's an easy one. And so it's great that we are expanding our the tools in our toolbox, whether it's MDMA. Some people may find ibogaine helpful. That's great, and we should give people what they want as part of their treatment because that's why they go to treatment to get what they want. And I think that's what we should do. So I'm really excited to see that kind of thing happening, and so I'm a supporter quietly, but that's not my sort of lane. My lane is the sort of liberty lane for people who don't have a disorder and they want to use these substances in order to exercise their liberty or in their pursuit of happiness.
Right. Like the majority of my drug use has been highly pleasurable, like entirely what many people would call recreational. And it's been tremendously helpful for me. Like I'm not going to Peru or, sitting on a couch doing drugs with a therapist or something, which,
Yeah,
I loved your comment about that being creepy.
yeah. I got to tell you, I was on a podcast recently with one of these so-called progressive Democrats, and she took exception to me saying that it was creepy. And it was a really bizarre comment. And then I just reminded her of the sort of sexual assaults that occur in that setting. In for some people where they had a guide and the person took advantage of the person who was under the influence. And of course, this person who was raising this issue, who took exception with the creepy thing, knew nothing about this sort of this phenomena, what happens in some cases where people get taken advantage of. And it's like, how are you going to have this conversation if you don't know what's happening in the world?
Incredible. But how many people just like come at you totally uneducated? Like how many books have they read on the drug war? Zero. I guarantee like 90% of them read nothing on the drug war.
Yeah, a number of people early on came at me and they didn't read anything. And again, that's my own sort of naivety. I thought like, oh yeah, great. You are gonna do this. You're gonna have this discussion with me, so you'll be prepared because you don't want to look bad. Nope, I was completely wrong.
Ugh.
I misunderstood the goal. Their goal was not to have some sort of discussion to figure out what I was saying or to highlight what I was saying or to delve deep into it or to raise some issues concerning what I had said. No, that wasn't the goal. The goal was to attack me,
Mm.
and so I didn't. I That's not something that I expect, and yeah, so that's been a learning experience.
Right. Like the incentive structure for media is clicks and views, right? It's not anything about truth.
Yeah, yeah. This is kind of new. Well, it's more intense than it was back in 2013 when High Price came out, and so I feel like like an old dude out here now with not understanding how the game is played, and but I'm learning. I'm a quick study. I'm learning.
Oh, that's interesting. So you've seen a little bit of a difference in the landscape from that publication to this one and just the approach.
Yeah, also High Price was a little different. High Price was a book.
Totally.
Yeah, it's a book that was kind of comfortable for progressives and conservative as well. It's like it was a up from slavery book. Poor black boy from the hood, done well. Oh, we feel good about ourselves and our society. See, it can happen to you, kind of story. And whereas this book is like, fuck that, we want our rights. And so that's
Yeah.
a little some people like, know your place,
Jarring to the system. Yeah.
yeah, know your place, shut the fuck up.
Mm, right. Like I get the sense at times Kyle and I are a little bit ostracized from the psychedelic community because of my particular pro all drug stance, like very drug positive. And
Yes.
people want us to kind of fall in line in like this therapy and like, shaman context.
Yeah.
And I just can't get behind it. 100%. I'm like into the research and everything. And like people get some healing, but the drug war is like the primary concern.
That's right, man. And as long as you keep your focus on people and always thinking of everybody deserving the same humane treatment. As long as
Mm,
you keep your focus there, you can never be wrong. You can never be wrong. And that's the thing that I
mhm,
try to remember. It's like I don't care what substance you're using or what you're doing. You're not hurting anyone. That means that I must stand up on your behalf because you are a
mm,
human and I am committed to doing my best to serve humanity.
mm. Yeah, Kyle, what's your, you've been in the clinical world a lot longer than I have. Like, what's your kind of impression of this?
Well, I guess on one of our Solidarity Friday episodes, like, I was reflecting on, I've been really interested in the drug war, and it's been, a huge focus, I guess, since high school, and just kind of critiquing it. And, I never really did any substances during that time, but I just saw the societal impacts that it had. And, when I really started this project with you, Joe, I did come from that more kind of clinical focus on the research and also the shamanic aspect. And, one thing I guess I've been learning by talking to so many people and having these conversations with you over the past few years is it's really shifted a whole bunch because, yeah, I see the importance of like these different use contexts now, where before I was like, it needs to be done in this certain way. And yeah, Carl, I mean, your book really opened my eyes in a lot of different ways as well. Well, I guess I've always kind of been on that cognitive liberty kick for a while. That if whatever makes you happy, if you're not harming anybody, why really care? But yeah, that's really shifted, from that just strictly in the clinical world, and needs to be done. Because I definitely have friends in my life that continue to use certain drugs. They're functional, they're happy, and they get by. And I have to sit there and reflect on my own process and go, why am I judging this person right now? And it's like, oh, because they're not, using the things that I find beneficial. They're using the things that they find beneficial. And like, I don't know. Yeah, I've had to do a lot of self reflection over the years around this because, yeah, I've always been surrounded people using substances. It's always been an interest of mine of like, why do people use substances, and really having to sit with my own process at times.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. It's one of the things I talk about in the book in terms of like being a grown up and trying to be somebody who deserves liberty and in that you have to always reevaluate, check in, reevaluate your behavior, the impact of your behavior on other people. And then if it's impacting people negatively, it's incumbent upon you to check that and maybe change that. And so, but that's a constant process. I mean, I
Yeah.
um, I succeed sometimes, I fail on other times, and so that's another thing. Like the title, "Drug Use for Grown-ups." A lot of people there, well, not a lot, but there are some knuckleheads who make a big deal about the title. What's a grown-up? They want to have that. They want to have that argument. It's like, really, that's what you got out of this book? That's the thing you want to talk about? And it's one of these things that I assume people know that being a grown up is not some static thing. We are better at it in some times than we are other times, and you just keep trying. And so when people want to have that discussion, all of this, like all of these pearls, this heavy shit I'm dropping on you, and you want to focus on what's a grown up? Are you kidding? Even though I defined it, but people want to quibble about that.
it's unbelievable. Yeah. So I'd love to ask you a few questions about heroin.
Sure, man.
Um, if we got, you got me curious. I got put in the ICU from a mountain bike crash a few years back, and they gave me Dilaudid, and
Yes,
I absolutely loved it. I was trying to go without any pain meds for whatever stupid reason.
I'm
My
telling you,
girlfriend shows up. She's like, "What are you doing, idiot?"
I know, man. She's a smart one. God, because
Yeah,
I
you
had a
know.
I had a I had a dentist once who said, this. I love this person because she was like, "Why experience pain when you don't have to?" It's like, wow, it's such a simple statement, and she was so right.
Right. And, I think it's this weird Protestant, maybe even like Catholic holdover of like pain is good, like purges the body of sin kind of thing. It's like, that's fucked up.
I
It's
know.
not really great productive baggage.
Yeah, that's good to
Um,
understand this before one gets married and have children and partners, because you're gonna fuck up some kids if you have that view.
yeah, that's me. Yeah, pain don't hurt was the mantra growing up. It's fucked up. So definitely earned me a number of surgeries later in life. So heroin, like really interesting and pretty old, relatively speaking, drug. Like opium is probably, we've used it probably just as long as cannabis. I don't know the real history there, but
Yeah,
it's been around for ages, right?
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. And there's three main compounds in opium that we find helpful. Like heroin's one of the three. Is that right?
Well, it's morphine, opium, and codeine, and heroin
Morphine,
is
opium.
made from morphine. Just add two acid groups, and so morphine is essentially heroin. They're the same thing, basically.
Right. Like I definitely recall smoking a whole mess of opium when I was in college. It was typically mixed in with cannabis. It was fun. It smelled great. I know some very wealthy people that, you go party somewhere. This is their party trick to make sure everybody goes to bed. They bring out the opium and everybody
Yeah,
eventually just the cocaine goes away and they end up, all
Y-
their friends are now in bed.
yeah, yeah. The smell of opium is such a beautiful, sweet smell. I love that smell. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Kyle, I assume you've smoked opium but I don't really know. I never
No,
asked you.
no, never.
No,
I've
you've
I've
never?
I've had friends smoking around me, so I know the smell. But yeah, beautiful. I've had morphine in the hospital, but I was when I had that snowboarding accident. But I actually I didn't use a lot of it. I think I ended up taking like, I don't know, 28 hits of the little machine out of like 80 something, and it wasn't. I didn't. The thing that just messed with me, why I stopped taking it, was just because I couldn't tell the difference if I was dreaming or if I was awake. So I guess,
Mm.
Morpheus came in there and, it was kind of a, and that just screwed with me. I was young. I was 16. It'd probably be a different experience now.
Yeah, it's probably. Can you lay that out briefly for Carl, just for context?
Oh, yeah. So I got in a pretty bad snowboarding accident. I was 16, ended up rupturing my spleen. And yeah, I lost a lot of blood internally, around like 5 to 5.5 pints of blood. And so I had a near death experience.
Well, you guys have had some accidents, man. God damn.
Maybe that's what brought Joe and I together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You
can't
all, I
stop getting
mean,
hurt.
I'm telling you, I mean, like your drug use is like such a minor activity compared to this other shit you all be doing.
Well, and that was my critique a little bit ago. It's like, why is society so worried sometimes about drug use when, the potential harms? I mean, yeah, I almost died snowboarding. Joe got in these accidents, and it's like, why aren't we outlawing snowboarding, bungee jumping out of planes if society and the government is actually concerned about your health and well-being? It's how many people die in cars every year and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we should do a show or something, some satire where we're all trying to ban snowboarding and all of us have our drugs with us, but we're going to ban snowboarding. Maybe maybe people will get it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to think so highly of people that they can get it, but it's just going to be like a real slog. There's been so much money spent on this topic that it's going to be a real uphill battle for us, but it's a battle we have to fight, right? It's
Yeah, and the opposition is very real, and
Yeah.
the opposition is fighting for a lot of resources. I mean, there's a lot of money at stake here. Every year we spend damn near $40 billion on this war on drugs, and then there are all kinds of other money that is being made and spent in this process, and so people are not going to give up that kind of money without a serious fight.
mm-hmm. Exactly. Like this whole cannabis fight is, just like a early warning sign, I guess, of what's to come. And this private prison deal, like all these politicians are in on that shit. heavily invested on both sides. And yeah.
Absolutely. But, like a lot of us are focused on the private prisons, and we should be. I mean, because it's so obvious. But in a place like Louisiana, there are no private prisons. But boy, they're making big money off the war on drugs. I mean, the local sheriffs
Mm,
are. They make money on these inmates and how many they have in their jails, and it's very lucrative. But it's not a private prison, but they're benefiting handsomely off of people's suffering, and few people have really interrogated like what's happening in a place like Louisiana, which they have, I think, the
mm,
largest proportion of their citizens behind bars because they are
gross.
they are really incentivized to do so.
Mm,
So I think education
right.
is like a big part of this. And I wonder like how can we go about educating those? I mean, obviously like putting out books and podcasting, but I think for like the general public, because I think, I don't know, whenever I have these conversations, even with like people around here where the heroin epidemic is like a huge topic and people are like afraid, I guess, to even go into like this alternative narrative around the drug war and like just drug use. And I wonder like how can we shift that a little bit? Like what type of approaches could we take?
It's one of these things where we all have our positions to play. And so, like you guys are doing this podcast, you just try and build this thing. You guys have the magazine, you do these things and you build them to be as big as you can and get the biggest reach you can because that's what you do. And that's okay. Please don't try to do everything. That's why for the book, I tried to give people and I asked of them a simple thing: get out of the closet. Everyone can do it, and doesn't require any special skills or anything. And so you want to make sure that people are not overwhelmed, because if they start to become overwhelmed, then it's going to decrease the likelihood of them doing it. And so I think that you are doing something. Just make it the best that you can. And you just try to be as honest as possible with the goal of uplifting everyone's humanity.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. So, got sidetracked. Back to heroin here. So, you made some really great arguments in the past around heroin and opiates in general, thinking like a safe supply. Like if we look at something like Switzerland and Portugal, we look at how much less bloodborne infection there is and overdose death. Like incredible, because there is a safer supply in a place like Portugal and a real actual safe supply in Switzerland. And like these things aren't really that harmful and aren't really that addictive.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you like to talk about heroin? I've heard you talk about it so much that I'm not really sure where to go.
No, man, it's fine. It's a hard thing because, I mean, particularly the past few weeks, the salacious media and the tabloids like to pounce on heroin because they know in the American psyche that anybody who does heroin must have a needle in their arm and they need to have it every moment of the day. And so they might rob you. All of these horrible stereotypes they are depending on. And so when you say, how do you talk? What we like to say. I mean, I like people to know that heroin is just another opioid, particularly when you get
Hmm.
pharmaceutical grade heroin.
Hmm.
You don't need to inject heroin. One of the reasons that you need to inject it in the United States is because of the low quality of the heroin that so many people may have gotten in the past. And so you inject the drug in order to make sure you don't lose any of it. You get a bigger bang for your buck. But if you got pure heroin, you can snort it, you can take it orally, you can do whatever you like. But it's just another opioid. And opioids, they produce some euphoria, some nice, pleasant anxiolytic effects while you are still tuned in and you actually feel more like the way they portray heroin in the movies sometimes. It's just It's upsetting because they portray it like
Mm.
people are deadening their sort of emotions and feelings. It's like, no, shit, you take heroin to feel. And so I love talking about opioids. Opioids are, as a class of drugs, you can obtain all of these things that I hear the psychedelic enthusiasts describing why they take psychedelics, to be with one, with the universe, to transcend this place, whatever people are seeking. Opioids, they're there. But in our society, people just don't know it. And they don't want to know it because they want to keep heroin, for example, in that corner and shut the fuck up. And you're a bad person. That's it.
Like Bernie Sanders calling it a killer drug. That was one of the lines you had. I'm like,
I
that's
know.
amazing that somebody like Bernie isn't educated yet, and somebody needs to get on that.
I know, man. I know. I know. That was the thing. That's the thing about the book. It's like I wanted to make sure people knew that this ain't a Democratic or Republican or libertarian issue. They're equally ignorant. I mean, although the libertarians have
Mm-hmm.
been better than most of the folks on the drug issue, but they're Americans. That means that they're fucking ignorant about a lot of these things.
Mm, right. And is there anything around like safe supply? So like Switzerland has this great regulated supply. There's no fentanyl is going to be in there, so you can't calculate your dose appropriately. Like fentanyl's great. I've had it a number of times in a medical scenario. Totally fine. Love fentanyl
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
On account of all my accidents, right? But
Yeah.
but like it's this supply issue is the real problem. Like we all know people who have died from this stuff, and it's hard to come back to it because it has such a strong emotional charge. But we need to, like, this is a topic that we need to face really bravely and have a really honest intellectual investigation into what's going on here.
I don't think we know what's going on. So like when people start talking about, well, we need more data, more evidence, that means they're just like putting your ass off. I mean, we know what time it is. Everybody knows what time it is. It's really simple. If people have the potential to get tainted opioids, more times than not, those tainted opioids will be more potent than the substance that they're looking for, and that means that these people now are at risk. But even if it's less potent on some occasions and more potent on other occasions, it's varied. That increases the likelihood of overdose. So it's a very simple thing. Just make sure you find a way to have a safer supply of these drugs. I mean, in places where, like Switzerland, they have these heroin clinics for people who are enrolled in the treatment program. They have 100% pharmaceutical grade heroin. But in places like Austria, Spain, Colombia, the Netherlands, these places, they don't have technically a government sanctioned sort of safe supply of heroin. But in all of these places, they have outstanding drug checking facilities, meaning that people can have their drugs checked for tainted material, for quality, for free and anonymously. In those places, they have less adulterants in their drugs. In those places, they have less drug overdoses. It's really clear and it's really simple. And so our job is when politicians or whoever are out here saying that they care about the opioid crises and they're not talking about drug checking, you can stop listening to them because those people are idiots or they think you are an idiot. But in any case, there's no reason to listen to those people.
Mm-hmm.
I was bringing
Absolutely. They're not. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was bringing a lot of these points up to somebody that their child, a lot of their friends have died and overdose. And I was bringing this point up. It's like, if we had drug checking or if we had good sourcing, like how many of these people would still be alive right now? One of their arguments was like, yeah, but then you're kind of creating this whole generation that it's okay to use a highly addictive substance like heroin, and then you're creating a generation of addicts. And so I wonder, just about that education around, yeah, saying that, not everybody's going to turn into somebody that uses every day and it being highly addictive that way. But yeah, it was interesting to have that conversation and try to approach it with somebody that was just much more conservative. And again, like my town has been, I guess, kind of hit. And so a lot of people around here, like drugs are bad, highly addictive, yeah, I've been to plenty of funerals within the past decade, which is kind of messed up. But again, I think that's why I get passionate about the drug testing and, maybe safe injection and stuff like that, where it's like, how many people would still be alive maybe, and maybe actually thriving if they weren't kind of navigating this underground market, and if some people weren't arrested and then had felonies that were, they were able to go get like a different type of job. So yeah, it's so complicated. But not.
Yeah, the thing is, I think the assumption of the person, it's flawed, and I think it might be helpful to point that out. Like they assume that people will use heroin every day or some other opioid every day because you have drug checking. That's such a flawed assumption, and that you have to really deal with those assumptions first, because the person may not realize that the assumption is flawed. For example, like my kids, if we have drug checking in our neighborhood or whatever, if they came up with drug checking, me as a parent would have made sure that they were still meeting the expectations that their parents have for them. And I still have to do my job as a parent, whether there is a drug checking or not, whether they're handing out condoms at school or not. I still have to do my job as a parent. And so this notion that like someone leaps from us making sure that those individuals who are using a drug or who are going to use the drug, we're just simply making sure that they have the safest possible available substance, and we're trying to make sure there are no tainted things in this supply, at least in this community, that's going to immediately kill them. That's all we're doing. And now this person has leaked all the way here. My kid is going to be an addict. That's not even relevant to this conversation. And so that's where you have to like point out to the persons that the assumption is flawed, and they may not even realize it's flawed. But that's not relevant here. We're trying to just make sure people live another day. And it's not like you are saying, hey, you should use this drug. No, we're just trying to make sure that we know that people will engage in premarital sex. So we try and ask kids, we try and make sure that the kids have condoms, they have this other information. That's like saying, well, if we make condoms available, nobody's going to get married, and then we're going to have all these children in our community. These children from unwed parents. That's crazy.
Being a parent, do you have any, I guess, like worries with your children, or like how do you approach that? And I guess like what's your process been around even like writing this book, coming out, and then seeing your kids grow up and maybe or may not be engaging in substances?
Oh, I thought you were saying just worries for your kids, because my worries for my kids are not related to drugs. My worries for my kids is related to them being black men in this American society that has treated black men poorly historically. And so I worry about my kids interacting with the police far more than I
Right,
worry
and
about.
you had that one story with your child getting like with security on campus, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's where my worries are with my kids. It's how the society will treat them in terms of drugs. No, I don't have any worries because I did my job as a parent. And that's not to say that my kids, that's not to say that they may not have problems over indulging in some substance or not. I mean, that they will be just like other young people in that respect. But I know I will have done my job, and they know that they can come to their father and not be afraid if they need help. And so drugs is the
Mm.
least of my concern with my kids.
Mm. So I'd like to chat about health and happiness. I loved your reframing there, and I think that's really helpful. Like the majority of the effects from, I guess, non-medical drug use are positive, and that's something we got to remember. And I wonder if you can kind of chat about that a little bit. What was your thought process around reframing this thing from harm reduction to health and happiness, which I think is a lot more productive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just always concerned about harm reduction being married to drug use. You know, these terms are wedded. And then as a psychologist, I know how our language shape how we think and how it shapes our
Mm.
behavior. So I wanted to comment on that. I didn't know how I was going to comment on that until listening to Al Green's Love and Happiness. And then, so I thought about it from this perspective. Just, we're trying to do exactly that, trying to be healthy and happy. And that's what we try and do just in life. And drug use is not any different than a number of activities in which we engage, like sexual intercourse, hanging out with significant others, traveling, whatever we do, all of these kind of things are in the interest or pursuit of health and happiness, and not to like, I'm going to engage in this activity to reduce the harms. It's like, what? That's the that's the farthest thing from my mind when I'm like, I have set aside some time to engage in some psychoactive activity. I'm not thinking about harm reduction. I'm thinking about, as my dad say, I'm thinking about getting some for the head so I can get the head right. That's what I'm thinking about, not
Mm.
not harm reduction. You know what I'm saying?
Makes me think of my rock climbing career, speaking of other injuries. Like you're not going rock climbing to reduce harm, right? You're going rock
Yes,
climbing to get your head right, to get your exercise, to be with your friends. This is an activity that certainly has a risk profile, but it's definitely very different, from trying to stay safe. You must stay safe. Like I don't even know what to tell you.
that's right. That's right. How about you go and bury your head in the sand? I mean, because if anything that's worth doing, it's going to carry some risk. That's just life.
Hmm.
But
Right.
it always troubled me that our activity had this harm associated with it every time we talked about our activity. And that's why we as a society are so screwed up when it comes to drugs. That's what it's really shaped people's perceptions. And so I tried to get people to think about, let's get rid of that phrase. And so we don't wed our activity with harms.
All right. So let me try to use it. So, what kind of health and happiness strategy might you use if you want to space out your kind of drug use? Like, how do we stay healthy and happy if we're a heroin user or an amphetamine user? Like, what have you seen be successful?
Yeah, so whatever drug people use, I hope they understand the entire constellation of effects that that drug produces. For example, let's think about the opioids, whether it's heroin, whether it's oxycodone, whether it's something else. So, like heroin, we talked about some of the positive effects, euphoria and anxiolytic, all of these nice things, but it also has some other effects that may not be as good for your sort of long term functioning if you're not attending. Like heroin slows down the sort of motility of your stomach and emptying of that gastrointestinal tract. And so you can get constipated if you're not attending to your diet, exercise, your amounts that you're using. So you have to really be careful about it because it's important that people have bowel movements on a regular basis. Otherwise, you can get ill. And so people who use opioids typically know how to do that. Some people increase the amount of fiber they get, water, exercise, all that sort of thing. All of those things help in that respect. So we think about something like amphetamines, whether it's methamphetamine, amphetamine, or some other amphetamine. It can disrupt sleep, food intake. It can disrupt. Both of those functions are critical to you functioning well. So you got to make sure you're getting the proper amount of sleep, nutrition, healthy nutrition. Because if you don't, you might have some problems. And of course, people will attribute it to the drug, but when in fact it's because you haven't slept, you haven't eaten, you haven't gotten good nutrition. And so, again, this is all about being responsible. And if people are not responsible, they may not live as long and they may not be as healthy. And so this again, it's kind of, you would like to think that these things are common sense, because if they're not common sense,
Right.
if they're not common sense, we've done a poor job of taking care of our citizens.
Mm-hmm. So I'll disclose some more. I think I've talked about it on the show, but a party I go to or try to go to every year, and it's not Burning Man. I'm using heavy amounts of MDMA, LSD, mushrooms, Adderall, etc., over the course of a week. And I know that I have to plan in maybe 7 days of pretty extreme downtime after something like that. And I'm trying my best to eat as much as possible through the whole process. And it's not easy. And, I'm sure I might have slightly more fun if I did less food. But I might also end up in the medic tent or something. And, there are strategies around this. Like that week doesn't make me feel addicted or something like that, or chemically dependent. But, it certainly does a toll on my body. And I know that going in. And it's just that much fun that I'm willing to take that sacrifice, I guess. So, weird confession. I just think it's like, I have a strategy, I think is my point.
That's right. You are a grown up. And, one of the things that people can do too is just, for example, just make tons of smoothies that have all of the nutrition in them. That way you don't have to have this heavy diet, but you're getting this good nutrition and you're getting good fiber, all of these things. Smoothies are just such a great way of making sure you're getting the basics in a quick and easy way.
Right. Less burden to digest. Yeah, so easier act. That's great. And I think this is why a lot of the kind of psychedelic culture looks extreme on the health thing once in a while. And I think it's, to balance out how little they're sleeping after you go to a rave or something. Yeah. So I'm curious about psychedelics, Carl, if you want to talk about that for a minute before we kind of wrap up here. It's an interesting class of drugs, obviously. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this show. In your book, you talk a little bit about 2CB use, which sounded like a lovely time. It's currently my favorite drug.
Yeah.
Even though I've only used it a few times. Yeah. How do you like to, explore psychedelics or, talk to somebody like Rick about these drugs?
Yeah, I really don't. I have a class or a select group of substances that I dig, and I'm good. I don't need to really. I mean, if there's something that I want to try because what have you, I may. But my sort of psychedelic experience has been relatively limited, and when the ones that I have done, if I usually do substances in a sort of intimate setting, like with my wife or what have you, and which connecting. I'm trying to connect, but my second psychedelic experience, it's kind of a lone endeavor, and I'm not connecting with the person as much, and so that's like that's not. So I don't do that these days as much. Because in part I'm alone almost my entire life. When I write, I'm just alone, and it's frightening being in the dark alone all the time. And so much of my sort of use these days is connecting and trying to be human again.
Mm, right. So like this, yeah, MDMA and, amphetamines being this class of drugs that, can make you feel a lot closer to people. I think it's a really under discussed thing. Like, do you, can you speak to like your own personal experience with like amphetamines versus MDMA, also an amphetamine, a methamphetamine?
Yeah, I think of like MDMA. That's an amphetamine. I just think of it as an amphetamine. Of course, it's a great amphetamine, and it has
Hmm.
these sort of great properties where you connect and can be more empathetic and feel connected and you feel magnanimous and all of those things. It's great. But, good doses of other amphetamines like 2-FMA, or even really good, nice dose of just D-amphetamine or methamphetamine, you can also feel really connected and close and lovely. But I think MDMA is superior in that regard. But still, the thing that they share is that you have this incredible amount of energy that you are. I mean, you can conquer the world. Not in this way where you're like telling people you're going to conquer the world, but in this sort of quiet, self-confident way, And that, so the amphetamines are lovely in that respect, and they are. We don't. I don't think we give them enough respect. In part because they use them like D-amphetamine in medicine so much, and then so people, they take therapeutic doses. I don't know, anywhere from 5 to maybe 60 milligrams orally, and then people get tolerant. And so it just becomes like background noise, like caffeine. But you talk about non tolerant users getting a nice 50 milligram dose of something, just a D-amphetamine compound intranasally or some, and they're not tolerant, and then this is not a drug that they use on a regular basis. That's a nice effect, particularly in a setting in which it's comfortable. You are with loved ones, and there's no anxiety. That's a great. That could be a great experience.
I've got a friend who is, I kind of consider him one of these, hardcore amphetamine guys. I've never asked him about his doses or anything, but it's pretty clear. And I love being around him. Absolutely. Especially when he's super high on amphetamines. And it's a weird thing. It's just this upbeat attitude and fun. And he could be on psychedelics as well. It's hard for me to say without asking him. But it's, I have a lot of positive experiences personally with amphetamine. I've not had a hard time yet with them. And yeah, it's something that I think people should shit on a lot less.
Yeah, I think that I don't. I don't know if we can control their sort of tropes, but that's okay. The thing that we can do is just point out when they are inaccurate about their descriptions, and they are inaccurate a
Hmm.
lot. And so we can just point that out. And hopefully, over time, I know if it was me and I'm embarrassed by something that I said that was inaccurate, I want to correct it. So hopefully, over time, people will want to be more accurate. And that's what we can do. Uh,
Yeah. Kyle, anything you want to add before we kind of wrap up here?
No, I think I'm good. And I just want to say thanks so much for your time. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed it.
I feel the same, guys, and I'm so sorry we have to end, but I have another sort of 6 o'clock. I have something to do at 6, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I didn't realize we were going for about 2 hours, but it's it's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. And there you have it, Carl Hart. I really hope you liked it. I hope you learned something and it challenged some of your assumptions around drug use. This is a really important topic. So many people are dying because we're not coming out of the closet. And, that's only part of it. And it's kind of oversimplifying it. But people are being harmed by the drug war. And a major thing we can do is tell positive stories about your use, or just tell any story, really. And, Carl laid out a really great example in the interview. It's like, why are there no movies where people can just, use drugs here and there and be fine, get up for work the next day and not have that big of a problem? I think there's something there. So, yeah, I encourage you to read this book, Drug Use for Grownups. It's available all over. I'm sure you can get it from your library. Go tell your librarian you're interested in reading this, and maybe they'll buy it for the library if it's not there. So I really am curious what you think about this. And I know the rhetoric is challenging at times out here in psychedelia. Is it okay to be an occasional MDMA user to have fun? Is it okay to have LSD once in a while? Is it okay to have Adderall recreationally, or to use something like a heroin or an opiate pill? These are questions that we need to ask. I think the answer is yes. But I think there's a lot of other problems we need to address. And we'll get there in time. This is going to be a long project. And again, this is, I guess, an extension of Drug War Today. And I think we can serve people beyond our community, especially when we become compassionate and a little bit curious about why they do the things they do. Why do you like methamphetamine? Why do you like cocaine? Why do you like, the drug you do? These are really important questions. And what do you get out of it? Obviously you get a lot of, at times, not always, really helpful benefits from psychedelic drugs. But we've also, ended up with somebody like Charles Manson. So what does that say? And we've ended up with a fair amount of contemporary maniacs in the space. So, psychedelics aren't perfect. In fact, they can be problematic. And we need to be aware of that. To do really well, we need to be aware of the light and the dark here. Thus that phrase everybody pops around is the shadow. Like, there is a shadow side to psychedelia, and you need to be aware of it, especially if you're putting all sorts of time and energy into the movement. You want to know where the dark spots are and where the light spots are too. Otherwise, you are shying away from things that you might be able to improve or understand better and help others understand and help others as a result. So anyway, that's probably it for now. Thank you all for listening to this super duper long podcast. I really appreciate you. If you liked it, please do share it with a friend or family member and let us know what you think. Oh yeah, May 20, we kick off an 8-week program, psychedelics or navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. There are CEs available, and I love this class. It's so fun to teach it. And I love getting to know all these people from all over the world and hearing their stories and helping them in their educational journey. So check it out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. If you have any questions, hit us up. Happy to talk about that. Psychedelics Today, email@gmail.com for more. And I think that's it. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. This is Joe Moore signing off from Psychedelics Today from Breckenridge, Colorado. Bye-bye.